CCTV Camera World is proud to provide support for products purchased from our website. If you purchased your product from another vendor, please contact the vendor you purchased from for further assistance.
In the first part of this video, we'll be showing you how to change the IP address of a PoE camera from CCTV Camera World that's deployed over a PoE network connected to a router with an NVR on the same network. I'm using a laptop to go through the network on the router to access the web interface of the NVR, and the camera is connected to the same network as the NVR. This allows me to tap into the web interface of the NVR and go over the network and change the IP address of any connected cameras. It's important to note that you can have multiple different configurations here of how the camera gets connected, but it's most important you do not connect the NVR using one of the PoE ports to the router, but instead using the LAN port connected to the router, and then your laptop, which is my green cable here, and then your PoE switch is connected to the router, and then your PoE cameras are connected to the switch. Please make sure you do this one camera at a time so you don't get confused, and you can keep track of what IP address you're assigning to your cameras. We recommend you doing this on a benchtop like this so that you can make sure your cameras are properly configured before you go mount them. So let's jump into the laptop and let me show you how to do the IP configuration on a PoE IP camera from CCTV Camera World.
In this video, I'm going to show you how to manage and modify the IP address for your Security Cameras Inc. IP cameras using your Security Cameras Inc. NVR, or Network Video Recorder system. So you are going to need the SCI config tool installed on a Windows computer. I'll include a link to download and install the config tool in the video description. You'll also need your preferred web browser. First, you're going to need to open the SCI config tool. It may ask you to allow it through the Windows firewall, and you're going to want to click Allow. That'll allow it to search your network for devices. Here, I have an NVR and an IP camera. Here you can see the device type IPC, and they're both connected to my local network. And this will let me find the devices on my network. And if I want to change the IP address for my camera, I could easily use my NVR. So you can either click directly on the link for your NVR, or you can manually open your web browser. In this instance, I'm using Microsoft Edge, and then type that IP address in. So you can move your config tool to the side and then manually type that IP address in. All right. Now I need to type the username and password for my NVR. Should be the default password that's on the top of your recorder. There will be a label. If you've changed the password on your NVR, then you'll need to use the password you've changed it to. And you may also need to use that password for your camera, depending on how you set the system up, because the NVR may have given its password to your IP camera. So again, you need to use the default password that's on the label on the top of your recorder box or on the top of the recorder. And then if you've changed the password, that password may have flowed over to your camera. So just be aware of that when you're going through this process. Passwords are very important. So now that I've entered in the username and password, I need to click Login. I need to go to the Remote Setting tab at the top right-hand side. In the Remote Setting tab, you should already be on the Channel and then Channel page. If you're not, make sure you click on the Channel menu option at the top left-hand side. And then you need to click the Quick Add button. Just going to maximize my web browser screen here. And after clicking the Quick Add, what this is doing is actually searching my network, much like the config tool did. However, I have an Edit button, which will allow me to easily go into this camera and change its IP address. So I click on the Edit button, again entering the username and password for the camera. If you've connected your camera to your NVR directly, then it will have the password that your NVR had, or either default password of 10 lowercase I, capital L, and then all lowercase TXYH, or it could have a simple password of admin123 period Again, that's ADMIN 123 period. So that should be the password for your cameras. Now at the top, I need to set it to static. Otherwise, if my router or modem reboots during a power outage or maintenance, then my camera may get a different IP address. So if I click static, then I can change its IP address. Now I do need to check my network for an open IP address. This is an important step that is often overlooked and can lead to IP address conflicts, causing your cameras to not work. So to avoid this, I need to first go to CMD or command prompt. So I'm clicking the search button, or you can click the Windows button, or you can even do Windows X on your keyboard and then choose the terminal. Again, just to make things simple, I'm just going to click on Windows, type out command, and then it's the first option, the command prompt. There's a number of ways you can find out what your local network scheme is. You should already know it from having logged into your NVR using the config tool. And your IP address scheme is the first 3 sets of numbers of an IP address. So in my example, it's 192.168.1.whatever. So if I want to find an open IP address on my network, I would need to do ping, P-I-N-G, 192.168.1, so that's my network scheme, and then again I'm adding a dot, and then I need to ping any number between 2 and 254. So if I were to, let's say, just choose the next number after 209 and do 210, then I need to hit enter on my keyboard. If I see destination host unreachable, that's a good thing. That means that there's nothing there at that IP address that will respond to the command prompt. Now, for example, if I were to do 192.168.1.209 and hit enter, we know that our camera is at 209 because our NVR and the config tool both told us that the camera is here. So if I enter, I should expect a response. And here I see a reply from. So the main takeaway here is, if you don't get a reply, in other words, destination host unreachable, that means that that is an open IP address on your network. Close out of the command prompt because I know that 210 again is open because I got destination host unreachable. And then I can type that IP address into here. So in my NVR, I went to the quick add page, clicked the edit icon, I entered in the username and password for my camera. I went to the command prompt and made sure that I pinged this IP address to make sure that there was nothing there already. Finally, I can click the OK button. It says down here, modify success. So you want to pay attention and look out for that message next to the cancel button when you get back to the quick add page. And then you are going to want to click cancel to get back out of the quick add page. Then you could manually add your camera by typing in its IP address. Or I'm just going to click cancel out of here. See, that would be a manual add, or you could also just use the quick add menu that we were just in. So I'm going to go back into the quick add menu. I'm going to tick my camera, enter in its username and password. And then I can choose which channel I want to add it to. I just want to add it to channel 1. So I'm going to go ahead and click add. Again, paying attention to that message, it said join successful and it says refresh successful. So if I do a manual refresh, the camera should no longer be there. So that camera is now added. If I click the cancel button, the camera is added to my NVR. If I go back to the live page, should have video from my camera, and I most certainly do. So again, once again, just to recap, we use the SCI config tool to find the IP address of our NVR. If we were to click the search button, we'll now find that the camera is set to 210. We either clicked on the IP address directly to go to the NVR, or we entered the IP address into a web browser manually, went to remote setting, on the channel page, click the quick add button, and then click the edit button to change the IP address of my camera. And then once again, use the quick add page to quickly add the camera by entering in its username and password, choosing the channel, and clicking add. In the next portion of this video, I'll show you how to do this process using the NVR with an HDMI monitor or HD television.
In the last video, we showed you how to use a laptop to set the IP address on your PoE IP camera from CCTV Camera World. Now what I'll be doing is taking the laptop away. Now that I have taken the laptop away, we're going to show you how to set and configure your IP address on your PoE IP camera from CCTV Camera World by using just the NVR itself and the HDMI monitor or VGA monitor connected to the NVR. Notice I do not have any internet connected to this router. It's all a standalone system. It's a CCTV system. It's a professional PoE camera system from CCTV Camera World, where everything is isolated from the internet. Should you choose to watch your cameras from the internet using an app or PC or Mac, you can always connect an internet connection here to the router and then be able to watch the system. Now in this particular system, I have a PoE switch connecting cameras, and the PoE switch connects to a router, and the NVR's LAN port connects to the router as well. Notice there, the PoE ports on this NVR are not connecting to the router because I want network communication coming from the main gigabit LAN port from the NVR. This is the high-speed port that allows the NVR to talk over the network through the router, through the PoE switch to any cameras that are connected. Please carry out this process one at a time on one camera at a time so you do not get confused. And we're going to show you how you can use this screen menu here to set the IP address on any cameras that are over the network. If you had cameras connected to the PoE ports on the back of the NVR, they would be plug and play. However, any cameras over the network need to have an IP address configured for them, and that can be done through the NVR.
Modify or change the IP address of a Security Cameras Inc. camera from a Security Cameras Inc. NVR. You'll need to access your NVR using the USB mouse and an HDMI monitor or HD television using an HDMI cable or VGA cable. I am connected to my NVR, and I'm going to use my mouse to go down to the bottom left-hand side of the grid screen here. It's going to pull up the menu. I'm going to select the main menu and then click Setup. Now this is the graphical user password. This will be found on a label on the top of your NVR. The default one is a backward C pattern. I'm clicking and holding as I'm dragging my mouse across each dots and then releasing my mouse once I've completed drawing the pattern. If you've modified the pattern to your own pattern, then you will need to enter in the pattern that you've set. Once I've logged in, I need to go to the Channel tab under the Channel menu. And then I can click the caret icons under Add Device to bring up another menu in the channel page. This is going to be a device search menu. So this Add Device caret brings up this search device interface. So after clicking search, what it's going to do is allow the NVR to search my network for devices. And here I have a camera at 192.168.1.210. You can see the other devices on my network, and that's my IP address scheme. So that's an important thing to note is your IP address scheme is the first three sets of numbers in the IP addresses you're seeing on your computer network. So again, mine is 192.168.1.something. So each individual unique device on my network has a unique IP address. So I will need to make sure that the IP address I am setting my camera is open on my network. So you may want to check that using a Windows or Mac computer. And earlier in this video, we do show how to use the command prompt from a Windows computer to search for an open IP address on your network. However, I know that 192.168.1.211 or 211 is open on my network. So in order to change this camera's IP address from 210 to 211, I need to click the pencil and paper icon. In here, I can see there is a type, If I were to set it to DHCP, that means that it would get an IP address from my router automatically. So if you're unsure of what an open IP address is on your network, you can set it to DHCP for it to get an open IP address, and then manually go back in and set it to a static IP address. You may be wondering, well, why would I want it to set it to a static IP address? Well, it's important to set it to a static IP address in case you have a power outage or your modem or router reboots during a maintenance period from your internet service provider. And what that means is when that router or modem reboots, if you have it set to DHCP, that camera may get a different IP address and go offline from your NVR. So to avoid that, again, we're going to want to set a static type for an IP address. Just to recap, you could use DHCP to get an IP address and then manually set it to static after your router hands out an IP address. Again, I'm just going to go to static and type in the IP address that I want to set. 211 using the backspace button here. And then it already has the password for my camera in there, but you are going to want to type in the default password that's on your camera. So this is where things might get tricky. It could either be the password for your NVR, which would be on the label, or it could be admin123 period. That's all lowercase, ADMIN 123 period. So it'll be either one of those two passwords. The last password it could be is if you've changed the password for your NVR, it may have synced that password to your IP camera, in which case you will need to enter in the custom password that you've set on your NVR. After you've entered in the IP address, set the type, and enter in the correct password, you can click the OK button. It says under modification, please wait. And within a few seconds, you should see an updated successfully message. We click OK. Cancel. We get back to the menu. We can click the search button. And now the camera has an IP address of .211. So I changed it from .210 or 210 to 211. So now to add the camera, I can go ahead and click the add button. Select my camera in the list. Enter in that password. And this is the password set on your camera. Then I can click add. Within a few moments, we should see the camera come up in our list here in the channel page within a MAC address software version. If I right click, I get back to the main menu. And if I right click again, I get back to my grid screen, and I can see here that I do have video from my camera.
Now, before we end this video, I wanted to talk about the different ways that you can connect PoE cameras to a PoE system over the network. One of the challenges for someone who's beginning in setting up a CCTV surveillance system with PoE cameras is understanding network design. A lot of people get confused with PoE ports on the back of an NVR and PoE ports on a switch. So let me kind of discuss that. When you look at the back of the NVR, some NVRs have built-in PoE ports. These are plug-and-play PoE ports that are meant for use with cameras from the same brand. That way, the NVR and cameras of the same brand talk the same protocol or language to be able to recognize each other and connect automatically and then display video on the monitor. If you use cameras from different brands, they're not going to fire up automatically. There's a lot more configuration needed, and sometimes they might not even work. So when you use the PoE port to the back of an NVR, you have to make sure you're using cameras of the same brand, and the NVR will automatically configure them and set their IP address and username password. We're using, in this case, the LAN port, which is a gigabit port in this case on this particular NVR, to connect the NVR to the network, which is being provided by this router, which is a Wi-Fi router. And then we're connecting a PoE switch to allow this 32-channel NVR to add more cameras to it. So while this is a 32-channel NVR and it only has 16 PoE ports, it can add additional cameras over the network using a PoE switch. I could even use a 16-port switch here. I could use a 4-port switch here. I could use a 32-port switch here, a 24-port switch here. It doesn't matter. But I cannot go beyond the max number of cameras this NVR supports. So I'm adding additional ports to add my cameras beyond the first 16 by adding a PoE switch. And I chose to use an 8-port switch for this demonstration. The switch gets connected using an uplink port, which is a higher data rate back to the router. So that's key, a higher data rate connection from the NVR back to the router and a higher data rate connection back from the PoE switch to the router. Why are they higher data rate? As most PoE switches are only 100 megabit PoE ports, while the uplink ports are usually a gigabit uplink ports. And so is this LAN port on the NVR. Yes, there are gigabit PoE switches which have gigabit PoE ports as well, but they're more expensive. So you might not be using a gigabit PoE switch. And then I've got my camera connected to the PoE ports on the PoE switch. Now, this is a standalone system, like I said. You only need internet if you want to be able to watch the system remotely from somewhere else. But if you were wanting to watch the system using a PC or mobile device, you could still do that locally by tapping into the wired network on the router or the Wi-Fi network, as this is all networked together. All you would do is put in the IP address of the NVR and you'll be able to watch your system locally with your laptop, computer, or desktop, or your iOS or Android device. Now, I chose to connect my NVR directly to the router. Let's say you didn't even have a router and you didn't want a router. It gets a little bit more complicated where you have to understand that when I take the router away, a lot of the configuration or search services that the NVR offers, or that your laptop would be able to do by using the configuration tool for the particular camera, they'll go away once you take this out, because this provides DHCP services for those search tools to work. But let's say you've already configured the IP addresses and you don't want the router anymore. You can basically disconnect the router and move it away and take your switch and plug it directly into the NVR. Now the PoE switch is talking directly into the NVR and there's no more router involved, and you can move this away. Here's a second way to have the same exact setup that I had before, but instead what I've done is I've moved my connection going from the router to the PoE switch, and then the PoE switch is connected to the NVR directly. So what's happening is data goes from the NVR directly to the switch, and then to the cameras, or from the NVR to the switch to the router. They're still the same. There's no difference. Data is still flowing together. This is all one local network, but the path of the data transmission has changed. But this is still a local network. I could connect this to the internet if I wanted to watch the video remotely, or I can connect on the local network, my phones, my PCs, to the router and be able to watch the NVR remotely. But this is all still with just one network. Understanding this is key. A lot of times people think more in the case of, let's say, an analog approach where you have to have things connected a certain way to understand networking. I want to make sure you understand that this is all just one network, and the router is also on that network, and it allows you access from Wi-Fi devices or wired computers back to the NVR and to the cameras. Now let's say you didn't want a router. I just disconnected the router that was connected here before, and now I have a standalone system with the NVR connected to the switch and the switch connected to the cameras. You could do this after you've configured everything and you don't want a router in place. For some reason, some customers prefer that. You can certainly do that. But by doing this, you're also removing access to this network port that's necessary to connect to the internet to watch remotely. So if you don't want remote viewing services and you want everything local, you could also set up everything this way. But to do the device searches we do in this video, or in the videos for our IP camera setups, a router is necessary for the device search functions on the computer configuration tools or on the NVR to work. Without that, they're unable to find your PoE cameras. So please make sure you have a router in place in the beginning, and then you can remove it at the end after you've assigned static IP addresses to your cameras.
If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.